Good morning. Our report is on predictive research. My partner is K. April N. Uribe and I am Rose A. Malinaw. Predictive research is an empirical research concerned with forecasting future events or behavior, the assessment of variables at one point in time so as to predict a phenomenon assessed at a later point in time. It studies or determines frequency with which something occurs or its association with something. The major areas in which predictive or diagnostic design are used include business, marketing, clinical setting, and government agencies. The term predictive research design is not typically used. However, prediction is a goal of the scientific method. Used as a non-experimental design, correlation analysis, regression, and multiple regression analysis are used to determine and measure the relationship between variables, and in effect, enabling the ability to predict the changes in the dependent variable based on the value of the independent variable. For example, a researcher might collect high school data such as grades, extracurricular activities, teacher evaluation, advanced courses taken, and standardized test scores in order to predict such college success measures as grade point average at graduation, awards received, and likelihood of pursuing further education. In the clinical field, predictive research is also called diagnostic research. The statistical tools used include regression, linear regression, and logistic regression. Prediction does not care about the relationships between independent and dependent variables. Its only concern is, given a set of inputs with specific values, predicting the outcome with the highest accuracy possible. In these cases, with a properly computed predictive model, one can state, given these attributes and their values, we can state with 80% true positive accuracy that a person, event, organization, or etc. belongs to class Z. This is widely used in medical diagnosis, with many healthcare organizations moving beyond expert rules-based system to using neural networks that may have been trained on massive data sets to diagnose patients' conditions. In diagnostic research, the researcher must be able to define clearly what he wants to measure and must find adequate method for measuring T along with clear-cut definition of population he wants to study. Here's an example. The study is entitled Deep Learning for Prediction of Obstructive Disease from Fast Myocardial Perfusion SPEC, a multi-center study. The study evaluated the automatic prediction of obstructive disease from myocardial perfusion imaging, or MPI, by deep learning as compared with total perfusion deficit, or TPD. A total of 1,638 patients, 67% of which are men, without known coronary artery disease are the participants in this study. Deep learning was trained using raw and quantitative polar maps and evaluated for prediction of obstructive stenosis in a stratified tenfold cross-validation procedure. The conclusion in this study stated that deep learning has the potential to improve automatic interpretation of myocardial perfusion imaging, or MPI, as compared with current clinical methods. My partner, Kay, will give you some examples or journal articles using a predictive approach later. Nonlinear statistical methods are predominantly predictive, including flexible discriminant analysis, support vector machines, k-nearest neighbors, and neural networks. These are difficult to impossible to interpret because x1 gets a new coefficient depending on its value in a range of values. This research is beneficial not only in the clinical fields, but predominantly in business, for predicting business outcomes or potential of employees. This is not to say that inferential techniques cannot be predictive, because they are all predictive, albeit with lower accuracy. except in cases where there is a purely linear or computationally singular relationship between inputs and outcomes. But in many cases, a predictive technique does not provide inferential information, such as the case with deep learning neural networks. There are pros and cons in using predictive research. One of which in pro is accurate modeling of nonlinear relationship, which is almost everything. For con, we have lack of understanding of a distinct change in X causing a specific change in Y. Prediction research and etiological research. Prediction research shares many similarities in the design and conduct with etiological studies. Both may assess the relationship between a set of variables and an outcome of interest. Use the same statistical model to quantify the associations for each of the variables, and use the same metrics to describe how well the model fits the data. There are, however, several notable differences. For example, in the world of medicine, prediction research is not aimed at understanding the disease process, but at investigating the use of risk prediction in healthcare for informing individuals and for assisting decision-making. The intended healthcare use has implications for the choice of variables or predictors, outcome, and study population. Also, the assessment includes additional measures that quantify the predictive ability and clinical utility of the model. Clinical or public health relevance and feasibility are evaluation criteria that influence prediction studies, but play a lesser role in etiological studies. Here are a few terminologies. Risk factor is generally used to describe factors that are causally related to getting the disease. Prognostic factor refer to factors that affect prognosis of the disease. And predictive factors refer to factors that relate to treatment outcome. Predictors are the variables in the prediction model, irrespective of whether they are causally related or what outcome they predict. Predictors may be causally related to the outcome, but not necessarily.
We now have here a sample journal article featuring a predictive research design. We have a predictive correlation study, what human capital and demographic factors relate to credential completion for STEM students by Ricky Dale Jensen. The study used a predictive correlation design using logistic regression. So this dissertation examines the educational attainment of college STEM students in Arkansas in an attempt to identify the human capital factors that predict completion of a STEM degree or certificate. Students seeking STEM credentials were identified using the State Higher Education database from the state of Arkansas, including the public 4-year universities and 2-year college STEM students from 32 colleges and universities were included from 3 cohorts and tracked 6 academic years. The criterion variable was STEM credential earned, whether or not the student earned any STEM undergraduate credential. More specifically, the purpose of this quantitative predictive correlation study is to examine human capital theory and how it relates to the criterion human capital attribute of college credential attainment to the predictor variables of high school GPA, ACT placement test scores, remedial status, gender, race, ethnicity, and age for the first time entering college students in the state of Arkansas. A number of hypotheses was proposed for the study. It includes whether or not there is a predictive relationship for each predictor factors mentioned earlier, the high school GPA, ACT placement scores, remedial status, gender, race or ethnicity, and age for the first time entering college STEM students. Alternative Hypothesis 1. The human capital factor of high school GPA has a predictive relationship with college credentials earned in Arkansas for the first time entering STEM majors. Alternative Hypothesis 2. The human capital factor of the ACT composite Placement Exam has a predictive relationship with college credentials earned in Arkansas for the first time entering STEM majors. The human capital factor for the ACT Mathematics Placement Exam has a predictive relationship with college credentials earned in Arkansas for the first time entering STEM majors. And then we have the human capital factor of the ACT English Placement Exam has a predictive relationship with the college credentials earned in Arkansas for the first time entering STEM majors. Alternative hypothesis 5. The human capital factor of ACT Reading Placement Exam has a predictive relationship with college credentials earned in Arkansas for first time entering STEM majors. And lastly, the remedial status for any remedial subject has a predictive relationship with college credentials earned at Arkansas for first time entering STEM majors. We also have here our null hypothesis for every predictor variable. So, first, the human capital factor of high school GPA has no predictive relationship with college credentials earned in Arkansas for first time entering STEM majors, and so on for the ACT Composite Placement Exam, ACT Mathematics Placement Exam, ACT English Placement Exam, ACT Reading Placement Exam, and for the remedial status. The results indicated that high school GPA was highly predictive with ACT mathematics scores having predictive capability but with limited effect size. Two other variables, the remedial status and gender, were predictive for two of three cohorts. This makes them the secondary predictors. So gender had a positive relationship with STEM credential earned with odd ratios from 1.404 to over 2, low significant levels at 0.05, and a medium to strong effect size. This is another example of a journal which features a predictive research design, a predictive correlational study of the relationship between grit and self-efficacy beliefs among pre-service teachers. This study investigated the personality trait of grit as a predictor of self-efficacy beliefs of pre-service teachers completing a teacher preparation program in a mid-Atlantic university. Its research question is, can grit score as measured by the short grit scale predict the pre-service teacher's self-efficacy beliefs as measured by the teacher's sense of efficacy scale? The study used a predictive correlational research design to determine if a predictive relationship exists between grit test scores and self-efficacy scores of pre-service teachers. For the purposes of the research study, the grit S scale score was the predictor variable and the teacher's sense of efficacy scale score was the criterion variable. The correlational research design is appropriate for this study due to the use of quantitative variables in the prediction of a relationship. In addition, the person-product moment correlation is the bivariate measure that was computed to determine the strength and the direction of the relationship. Following the closing of the questionnaires, the researcher collected and exported the data from Qualtrics in SPSS and began analyzing the data. Scores for each instrument were tallied and characteristics were coded. Data was transmitted electronically using Qualtrics on a password-protected network. Data files were created and organized. All files, documents, and questionnaires were stored and organized via the researcher's computer in a password-protected folder with a backup of files on external storage devices. Data organization allows the researcher to consolidate all information in one central location to facilitate data analysis.